My daughter thought I hadn't noticed when she went through my filing cabinet while I was in the backyard, but I'd seen her reflection in the sliding glass door. 2 days later, when the bank called about the loan application I never filed, I knew exactly what she'd been looking for. My son-in-law's fist didn't slam against anything. That wasn't his style. He was the kind of man who smiled while he was taking things from you. And I'd spent 3 years mistaking that smile for warmth. It started on a Tuesday in March, the way most disasters do, quietly, without warning, disguised as something ordinary. I was making coffee when my daughter called from upstairs, her voice carrying that particular brightness she used when she wanted something. "Dad, we need to talk about the house." I poured my coffee slowly. Outside the kitchen window, the oak tree in my backyard was just starting to bud. I'd planted that tree the year my daughter was born, 34 years ago, when this neighborhood was still new and my wife Beverly was still alive to see it grow. I took my mug to the kitchen table and waited. She came down in her robe, hair still damp from the shower, and sat across from me the way she used to sit when she was 12 years old and had broken something she didn't want to tell me about. Her husband followed a minute later, already dressed, tie already straight. That told me everything. He'd been awake longer than her, thinking this through. "We've been doing the math," my son-in-law said, pulling out the chair next to my daughter without being invited. "On the house." "What math is that?" He set his phone on the table, turned it toward me. "A real estate website. My address. An estimated value of $412,000. You're 63, my daughter said. You're retired. This is a big house for one person. It's the house you grew up in. Which is exactly why we think it makes sense." My son-in-law leaned forward. He had the practiced calm of someone who'd rehearsed this. "If you transferred the deed to us, you'd eliminate your property tax burden. We'd cover the utilities, the maintenance. You'd still live here." I looked at my daughter. She was studying the grain of the kitchen table. "And when I'm gone?" I asked. "The house would already be in our names," he said. "No probate, no estate complications. It protects everyone." I took a long sip of coffee. The oak tree outside swayed slightly in the early spring wind. Beverly had loved that tree. "I'll think about it," I said. That was the last honest conversation we had. The requests accelerated after that, the way these things always do once someone decides you're a soft target. 3 weeks later, my son-in-law needed me to co-sign a business loan for a consulting firm he was starting. $40,000. The bank required a co-signer with assets, and wasn't I family, and didn't family help each other? I signed. I don't know why exactly, except that my daughter sat across from me in this same kitchen and told me it would change their lives, and I still wanted to believe I could give her that. 2 months after that, it was the credit card debt. $22,000. Most of it from a period my son-in-law described vaguely as the transition between jobs. My daughter's eyes were red when she asked. She said she hadn't slept in weeks. I wrote the check. Beverly would have stopped me. She had a gift for seeing people clearly that I'd never developed. She used to say I gave everyone the benefit of every doubt available, and then invented a few more. After 31 years of marriage, I still couldn't tell when someone was lying to my face. I'd taken it as a character flaw and tried to work around it by trusting people until I had a specific reason not to. That strategy had cost me $62,000 and counting. The filing cabinet incident happened on a Thursday afternoon in September. My daughter had come over to, as she put it, help me organize some things. I'd been in the backyard pulling up the last of the summer garden when I glanced toward the house and saw her reflection in the sliding glass door, clear as a photograph, her standing at the cabinet in my home office, the top drawer open, her hands moving through the hanging folders. I stood very still in the garden and watched. She pulled out a manila folder, opened it, took out several pages. She photographed them with her phone. Then she replaced everything, closed the drawer, and walked to the kitchen like nothing had happened. I finished weeding the tomato bed. I came inside. I made us both sandwiches and we talked about her cousin's new baby. And the whole time I could feel the shape of what she'd taken from that drawer. The deed to this house, my financial statements, my insurance policies, sitting between us like a third person at the table. That evening I called my accountant and asked him what someone would need to forge a deed transfer in the state of Georgia. 2 days later, the bank called. "Mr. Whitfield," the loan officer said, "we're following up on the home equity application filed under your name last week. We need a few additional documents." I had not filed a home equity application. I asked her to hold, walked to my home office, opened the top drawer of the filing cabinet. Everything looked exactly as my daughter had left it, except I knew what had been photographed, and I knew what my son-in-law was planning to do with those photographs. I thanked the loan officer and told her there had been an error. I asked her to flag the application as potentially fraudulent and to contact me before processing anything else connected to my social security number or property address. She put a note in the file. I hung up and sat in the quiet of my office for a long time. The oak tree cast long shadows across the backyard in the late afternoon light. Beverly's photograph watched me from the corner of my desk. The one from our anniversary trip to Savannah. The summer before she got sick. She was laughing at something I'd said. Her head tilted back, completely unself-conscious. "I know," I said to her. "I know." I called my attorney the next morning. His name was Jim Calder, and I'd known him since we were both young men doing unremarkable things in this city. And he was exactly the kind of lawyer who didn't ask unnecessary questions. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I'd always respected about him. "They're building toward something," he said when I finished. "I know what they're building toward. What do you want to do about it?" I looked out my office window at the oak tree. The September leaves were just starting to turn at the edges. "I want to let them finish building it," I said. Jim was quiet for a moment. "That's either very smart or very patient." Beverly always said I was too patient. Beverly was usually right about most things. We talked for another 40 minutes. When I hung up, I had a plan and a fraud alert on every financial account I owned, and a very clear understanding of exactly how far this had already gone. I didn't change anything visible. I still had my daughter over for Sunday dinners. I still asked my son-in-law about his consulting business, listened to his answers, nodded at the right moments. I was good at waiting. I'd spent 40 years as a civil engineer, and the thing that job teaches you above everything else is that you cannot rush the ground survey. You have to know exactly what you're building on before you start. What I was building on, it turned out, was this. My son-in-law had already submitted the fraudulent home equity application using the photographed documents as supporting material. He'd also, Jim discovered through a title search, filed a quitclaim deed, forged with my signature, attempting to transfer a 50% interest in the property to my daughter's name. The filing had been flagged automatically by the county recorder's office because the notary seal didn't match any registered notary in Georgia. He'd gotten sloppy. Or he'd gotten confident. Sometimes those are the same thing. Jim brought in a forensic document examiner. She confirmed the signature wasn't mine. She also found that the notary stamp had been purchased online. Illegal, but not difficult. The whole operation had cost maybe $200 in supplies, and whatever my son-in-law had paid someone on the internet to tell him how to do it. In October, my daughter called to tell me they'd found a wonderful opportunity. A property investment, she said. A small commercial building in Marietta that was being sold below market value. The owner needed a fast close. "We just need you to sign off on using the house as collateral," she said. "It's completely standard. Jim can look it over if you want." "That sounds reasonable," I said. Why don't you both come to dinner Saturday and we can go over the paperwork together? There was a brief pause. That would be great, she said. Saturday works perfectly. I called Jim immediately after I hung up. Saturday, I told him. I'll make some calls, he said. Saturday arrived gray and cold, the oak tree almost bare now, its remaining leaves the color of old copper. I made pot roast because it had been my daughter's favorite since she was 7, and because I wanted this to feel like every other Saturday dinner we'd ever had in this house, right up until it didn't. They arrived at 6. My son-in-law carried a bottle of wine and a leather portfolio, and he set both on the counter with the easy confidence of a man who thought he'd already won. My daughter hugged me at the door, and her arms were tight and genuine, and for just a moment I let myself grieve what this had turned into. We ate. We talked about the oak tree losing its leaves, about the neighbors down the street who'd finally sold their place, about nothing that mattered. My son-in-law poured wine and told a story about a client meeting that I didn't listen to. After dinner, he opened the portfolio. The documents are straightforward, he said, sliding them across the table. A standard collateral agreement and a modification to the property title reflecting joint ownership, for tax purposes. I looked at the papers. They were professionally prepared, not the amateur forgery he'd attempted at the county recorder's office. These had been done by someone who knew what they were doing. I'd like Jim to take a quick look before I sign anything, I said. You know how I am about paperwork. My son-in-law's smile didn't waver. Of course, we can schedule something next week. Actually, I said, I called him this afternoon. He's happy to stop by tonight. The smile held for exactly 2 more seconds before something shifted behind it. Jim arrived at 7:30. He came in, shook hands, sat down at the kitchen table, and put on his reading glasses. He took his time with the documents. My son-in-law watched him with a stillness that had replaced the earlier ease, and my daughter had stopped meeting anyone's eyes. These are interesting, Jim said finally. In what way? My son-in-law asked. In the way that a collateral agreement that references a deed modification that was rejected by the Cobb County Recorder's Office in September is interesting. Jim set down the papers and took off his glasses. You filed a quitclaim deed with a forged signature and a fraudulent notary seal. When that was flagged, you waited and tried a different approach. And then there's the matter of the home equity loan application filed in my client's name without his knowledge. The kitchen was very quiet. The refrigerator hummed. The oak tree outside the window was just a dark shape against the night sky. I don't know what you're talking about, my son-in-law said, but his voice had lost all its architecture. The bank has already provided copies of the application and the supporting documents, Jim said. The forensic examiner's report on the September deed filing is complete. I filed a complaint with the Cobb County DA's office on Thursday. My daughter looked at me for the first time since Jim had started talking. Her face had the expression of someone who'd been standing on ice and just heard it crack. Dad, I know, I said gently. I know you were scared. I know he convinced you it was just paperwork, just protecting the family, just moving assets around. I know he made it sound simple. Her eyes filled. I didn't think. I know you didn't. My son-in-law stood up. This is ridiculous. You're doing this to your own family over a misunderstanding about some paperwork. Sit down, I said. He sat. I don't know why he did exactly, but he did. There are 2 detectives from the Cobb County Fraud Unit sitting in a car at the end of the driveway, I said. Jim called them before he came in. What happens next depends entirely on what you do in the next 5 minutes. My son-in-law looked at Jim. Jim looked back at him pleasantly. What happened in the next 5 minutes was that my son-in-law started talking. He talked for a long time. He talked about the business debt he'd hidden from my daughter, about the credit card accounts she didn't know existed, about the investor he'd borrowed from privately who was, by his own description, not a patient man. He talked about the quitclaim deed as if it had been a reasonable solution to a temporary problem. And then he talked about the home equity application the same way. And somewhere in the middle of all that talking, he stopped sounding like someone who'd made a mistake and started sounding like someone who'd built a system. The detectives came in from the driveway at 8 o'clock. My son-in-law was charged with mortgage fraud, forgery, and filing false instruments. He bonded out that night, but Jim had already filed for an emergency protective order on the property. There was nothing left to take. My daughter didn't leave with him. She sat at my kitchen table after the detectives had gone and Jim had finally headed home, and she cried for a long time while I made decaf coffee and sat across from her and didn't say anything that would make it worse. She already knew what she'd done. She'd known for months, I think. The way you know something is wrong, but you choose the person beside you over the truth, because the truth is colder and harder and doesn't hold your hand at night. He said you'd never notice, she finally said. He said you trusted me too much to check. He was right that I trust you, I said. He was wrong about what trust means. She looked up. Trust doesn't mean I'm not paying attention, I said. It means I hoped I wouldn't have to. She moved back into her old bedroom that November, the one with the faded wallpaper border she'd picked out when she was 9 years old. Pink flowers on a cream background that we'd never gotten around to changing. Her husband, ex-husband, eventually pled guilty to 2 of the 4 charges in February. His attorney negotiated it down. He received 18 months in a federal facility and 3 years probation, plus restitution. The private investor, it turned out, had already filed a civil judgment against him. That was someone else's problem now. My daughter found a job at an insurance company downtown, the kind of steady, unglamorous work that feels like punishment at first, and then slowly starts to feel like solid ground. She came home on Friday evenings smelling like the same inexpensive coffee they kept in the office break room. And sometimes we sat on the back porch after dinner and watched the oak tree in the dark. And neither of us talked about what had almost happened. In the spring, I had the deed to this house reviewed, updated, and placed in a revocable living trust with Jim as trustee. No probate complications, no exposure to future claims. Everything above board and documented and exactly as transparent as it needed to be. My daughter is named as beneficiary. That didn't change. Some things shouldn't change just because someone tried to take them. I still have Beverly's photograph on my desk in the home office. The Savannah trip, her laughing at something I said. The harbor light coming in soft behind her. I look at it sometimes in the evenings when the house is quiet and I'm thinking through something I don't quite have words for yet. She was right that I was too patient. But patience isn't always a weakness. Sometimes it's the only tool that lets you see the whole picture before you move. And sometimes seeing the whole picture is the only way to keep anything worth keeping. The oak tree made it through another winter. It always does. I still think about the moment I saw her reflection in that sliding glass door. Not with anger anymore. That part passed a long time ago. What I think about is how calm I felt. How I finished weeding the tomato bed, came inside, made us both sandwiches, and sat across from my own daughter knowing exactly what she'd done. That stillness surprised me. I'd expected rage or grief or some collapse of the floor beneath me. Instead, there was just clarity, cold and clean as well water. I've spent a lot of time since then turning over the question of how we get to those moments. My son-in-law didn't wake up one morning and decide to become a man who forges documents and files fraudulent loans. My daughter didn't choose in a single instant to betray the person who planted a tree the year she was born. These things build slowly, one small compromise at a time, each one making the next one easier to justify. That's the part nobody talks about when they tell stories like this one. The gradual erosion. The way a person can look at themselves in the mirror every morning and still not see what they're becoming. I'm not a hard man. I don't think I ever was. Beverly used to say I had more faith in people than the evidence warranted, and she wasn't wrong. But I've come to believe that faith and attention are not the same thing. I trusted my daughter completely. I was also paying attention. Those two things can coexist. And knowing the difference between them, knowing that trust is not the same as blindness, is something I wish I'd articulated to her long before any of this happened. What I know now is that character isn't what you say you value. It's what you do when the money gets tight and someone you love is under pressure and the easy path is right there in front of you. My son-in-law chose the easy path, and then another, until he'd built a road that led straight to a federal facility in Georgia. My daughter chose to walk beside him longer than she should have. She's living with that now, and I think the weight of it is doing something useful, something uncomfortable and necessary. The way hard work is uncomfortable and necessary. The kind that reshapes you from the inside out if you let it. I chose to be patient. I chose to see the full picture before I moved. Some people would call that cold, and maybe it was. But I built things for 40 years by understanding the ground before I started. You don't abandon your methods when the stakes are personal. If anything, that's when your methods matter most. The oak tree made it through another winter. My daughter made it through one too. She's steadier now, more careful, more honest. The kind of honest that costs you something. I watch her sometimes on the back porch in the evenings, looking out at the yard, and I can see her thinking. I don't know exactly what she's thinking about, but I know the difference between a person who's drifting and a person who's reckoning with themselves. And she's doing the second thing. That's enough for now. Maybe it's enough for a long time.